Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences. We'll get on with the show in just a minute, but first a quick word from my sponsor. As a fellow gamer, you'll understand this is unacceptable. The solution? Head down to my new sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk. KIENDA stocks many of the hot new releases as well as some old hidden gems. Free delivery on orders over £30, further discounts on bulk purchases, and even 5% of your spending refunded back to you as points to be used for further discounts down the line. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to KIENDA and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
So you've been waiting for me to talk about this one for a while, chaps. Ceres, and if that's not the way you pronounce it, well then blame the people who told me it was Ceres. But this is a new worker placement game from Artipier Games, and I've been curious about this one. Not enough to back it on Kickstarter because I am trying to stop myself backing much on Kickstarter these days. But I was just thinking, you know what? I talk about Pursuit of Happiness a lot, but it was time that Artipier Games brought out another Euro. It didn't have to be heavyweight, but it just needed to be another Euro game. I felt they were just due a release that was going to be like their release for the year, and this one is it, a worker placement game about asteroid mining. So the theme's, you know, kind of up there. I quite like, you know, spacey type games, and this one could be sweet, but you know, I like worker placement as a mechanic. I don't expect this to be stupidly complicated, so if it could be smooth and streamlined, that's a good thing. But I went in mostly blind. I wanted to find out for myself, you know, from the get-go, what it was like, and I didn't even demo this at Essen. I didn't get time. I had to just basically grab the review copy, which this is, and, you know, play it back home. So it's taken me a while to get to this game, as well as the solo mode, and even one or two of the little mini expansions that have come with. And now I'm going to give you my full thoughts. Ceres is played over 3 rounds, and it's essentially dual worker placement. There are 2 aspects of workers that you need to contend with. Firstly, you get your leader discs. These go on the locations on the board. There are spots on each location, and they allow you to trigger an action when you go to each one, like you've seen before. But then there's also another type of worker you have to deal with. These different colored workers. Yes, there isn't a way to distinguish colour blindness, I'm afraid. I mean, they are blue, grey, and green and red, and there's no distinguishing feature on them, so colourblind people might have to turn away, I'm afraid. The idea with these is that you can grab from this communal pool of workers and use them on your various buildings that you've made. You've got 4 to begin with, but you can create more as the game goes on, and these allow you to create, you know, combos and build up your engine effectively. But these workers go on the building and they trigger the effects on them, and these buildings will also generate production as the rounds go on, but you are trying to manipulate these 2 aspects each round. What you're essentially doing is kind of up to you, really. I mean, you can research technologies to make your actions better, you can fulfill contracts, you can build more buildings to create more of an infrastructure, or primarily you can send your drones, which are these little guys here, off to the neighboring Ceres. Now this is basically turning as the rounds go on. There's a fixed way it turns, and these represent different spots where you can get additional resources and generate more production and victory points. But in order to get to here, it has to be in a certain area, because when the board is laid out, as you'll see from the photo, there's a red dotted line that tells you that this is where you can fly up to the asteroids and start mining them. Of course, you have to build these things first, which you require actions on these to do. So there is a kind of from A to B to C motif with this. The pool of workers is randomized each round because these ships are randomized in the game, and these are the ones that will bring them down. They have trading things where you can trade X for Y and resources, but they will also bring a selection of these workers. You'll have so many as a base, and then you'll have a few extra on these ships, and if you use them, great. If you don't, they go away. So, you know, do you want to use them or not? And the colors are going to vary each round. Sometimes you'll have more red than you will have blue. Well, what buildings have I got? I need to color coordinate this thing. So it's like, well, what do I do with this? It's kind of like a neat little system on there. You're, of course, tracking other resources such as, you know, metal and energy and things on your board, and each round plays out the same. It's just that as the game goes on, you have more to do with your various actions. You play this over 3 rounds, tot up the victory points, and of course, I wouldn't say there's a specific game that Ceres is exactly like or very close to, but the worker placement in this feels like most worker placements you've seen before, where you can go to a different location and do various things. It's kind of light enough actually to be almost compared to something like Lords of Waterdeep. Not as light as Lords of Waterdeep, that is clearly the lighter fare, but this isn't much heavier than Lords of Waterdeep, frankly. It's simple, go to a location, trigger the action, or put a guy on a building and trigger an action. It's not too difficult, it's fairly streamlined and fairly smooth in that regard. I also remember a while back that there was a game that was about asteroid mining. I can't recall its name, I'll see if I can find out and put it on the screen, but it was a slightly more heavier experience, more closer to something like Power Grid, where you had to go off onto these asteroid mines in space, and the rotation was, you know, very strict, and you had to plan ahead when the asteroid was going to be close by so you could go to it. This one doesn't have that same level of complexity. I mean, this map is basically saying that, you know, a decent chunk of it is where you start and you pay a bit of ice to move to a different one. That's literally it. You might have to plan like maybe a round ahead, but that is it. It's not that big a deal. It certainly isn't like a big brain burner in that respect. So yeah, it's a worker placement game like we've seen before. Smooth, streamlined, and fairly simplistic. So if you're used to something like Lords of Waterdeep and you want the next step up, then maybe this is the one to go for. Production quality wise, I'm quite impressed actually. You know, everything here is good, thick, sturdy cardboard, with the exception of the starter sheets, which are mainly just flimsy card, but you know, these aren't too bad. They're still glossy finish and they're still tough enough to withstand. But you've got, you know, screen printed different color meeples, including your little drones. Yeah, you got a few discs and cubes in some places. I don't know why they didn't replace all of those with those. But the board, oh my god, is this a table hog? This thing is huge, and I like it when boards come in this jigsaw style, really, because they seem to cater for more tables by doing so. But look at that. That's just one part of the board, and look how tall it is. This thing is gigantic. And then you've got to like bolt this thing on top of it, which is like a huge thing in itself, you know, this big deal, which is 3 layers and doesn't like go weird. It's not loose or anything like that or spindly. This is a decent quality item, and I love the fact that when you've got this all together, it looks imposing on the table and really does turn heads, particularly as I love when publishers put the name of the game on the board. That may sound pretentious, but it makes life a lot easier for me when I do Instagram photos, alright? Trust me, when you're having to say, oh, what's the title of the game? Read the board. It's right there. But yeah, all in all, very happy with it. The artwork is fairly basic. I mean, what there is of it is still decent. You know, there's some good, you know, general art on the buildings that you've got. I like the cover. I think the cover looks cool. The graphic design on the board is really clear, really concise. Yeah, that is definitely a plus point. You know, I have no trouble distinguishing, right, that's a location spot, that's the location, this is the action, this is what it does. You know, it tells you on each location in a kind of iconography sense what it does. It's very easy to see where you've got to go on here and where the sections are. It's just generally a very straightforward game to play in terms of smoothness. You know, there's still a few rules you need to learn, but not a ton. We'll get onto that in a second. But overall, it's set up in a way that makes it look cool, feel cool, and doesn't make it clunky. On that note of the rules, this is a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. I kid you not, the first time I played this at my club, I got this set up in advance, right? And then I thought, right, I'm going to learn this from scratch right now from the rulebook before everybody turns up and I teach it. And I thought I was going to be there for multiple hours having to learn this. It really is not. If you are used to this type of game, worker placement, you are just going to click with this instantly. And even if you're fairly new to worker placements, outside of, say, Lords of Waterdeep and that, this really won't take that long. The rulebook is not a particularly big rulebook. There's a good amount of pictorial examples here with card anatomy. The round overview only takes a couple of pages in itself, and then you just need to know what the various location actions do, and that's kind of mostly it for the game. Everything else is generally quite easy to deal with, and the symbology is on the back. Yes, I would probably prefer a personal reference aid, but you know, there's not a lot of iconography in the game anyway, so what's on the back should deal with most of it. and, you know, a proper setup diagram of the game in the start. So when I learned this from scratch, it really did not take me a long time to do. Now, that being said, there is a slight drawback, and, you know, I'll mention this now, but the one bit I did find quite fiddly was the favors. The favor tokens that you can get on one of the locations basically give you like some cool ability for the rest of the round. Annoyingly, the book is the only way to find out what they do. The board doesn't hint what they do, the token doesn't hint what they do, and you have no reference card saying what they do. If you like engine building where there's combos to be had, this one will suit you quite well. These buildings in particular add a decent amount of customization to how you're going to play. The research tracks on the board, you know, they've got 3 different paths that you could follow in the game, and they will improve them as you go forward. You could focus very heavily on the asteroid mining to get a load of resources from there, but you can also get a decent amount of production from just building more of the infrastructure cards, and they come in all different colors. There is some repetition, but there's also some variance in terms of the ability. And there's a decent amount of cards in here to add some variety in the game, but also customize your strategy quite well. You know, if you're going very heavy into manufacturing drones and getting them on the asteroids, well, then you're going to want a few buildings that let you do manufacturing actions more. And of course, you'll buy those, you'll play them, they'll generate their own production, and of course, they require their own type of worker. And that aspect is also quite a cool part, where you've got to have an idea of what the other players are likely to do with their workers. Not to the point where you're doing much direct interaction in this game. I mean, the interaction in this game is kind of similar to every other worker placement. You nick my spot, you nick my card, you nick my worker. The nick my worker part, though, is a bit more prominent because, of course, this is a communal stash of workers that everybody can draw from. If you're going for a bunch of blue buildings and somebody also has a lot of blue buildings, you might want to start using your blue buildings early before they get a chance to nick all the blue workers. And of course, you don't always have the same number of workers on those ships arriving, so you might only have the basic number of blues available and no extras on the ships. So you don't necessarily have to be totally mindful of what the other players are doing, but you certainly need to pay attention as to what workers they're likely to nick, or whether they've got a chance of flying up to the asteroid mines and stuff. There's usually enough location spots where you don't get blocked out of spaces too often, except maybe for the one that gets you more building cards, but again, that is still there, and it's the same in every other worker placement game where somebody blocks you and you get in their way.
Get out of the way.
Oh, I'm sorry, am I annoying you?
Yes, you are.
And there's some ways to dress up your copy as well. Firstly, you have the solo mode, which is a very simple automner rule, which essentially just has the automner doing its own thing. You know, they don't gain credits or alloys or influence in that, but they draw a card from a deck and it dictates where they go to kind of block your way or nick stuff that you want. Other than that, you kind of carry on as you were, playing the game as a typical multiplayer game, but at least you can play the solo, and yeah, this isn't a revolutionary solo mode, but it works and it caters for you and it allows you to play the game even if you don't have anybody around. The 2 little expansions vary in terms of their usefulness. I mean, the Comets one, I'm not as big a fan of. I find the rules for the Comets just a little bit fiddly to understand with regards to how they work, and I don't think they add enough to the game mechanically to make it worth that extra little faff, even though thematically it kind of works having comets flying around. So this one I could probably say you could skip, but I could take or leave if it was in the game. The Mars contracts, on the other hand, I quite like in the game, to the point where I'm almost tempted to teach the game with this included. These basically add like a new type of like contract thing that you can go for outside of the ones in the normal game. But what it is that you first go there to get a bonus, but then if you go there again, you get to take the contract, which basically has like a milestone objective, a bit like the basic ones in Terraforming Mars that you go for, and when you achieve it, you get more rewards. But the great thing with that is not only does it add more paths to victory, because you can obviously gun for some of those in a light or very heavy way, but also for new players, it kind of gives them something to aim for. If they're wondering what they should do, they could look at a contract, grab it, and they're like, all right, this thing now wants me to get, you know, a few things on some of these planets up here. Okay, fine. There's my objective. I gun for it. It gives players a little bit of direction in the game, and it's not a particularly rules-heavy expansion either. I mean, you know, it may look like a decent amount for a mini expansion, but honestly, it's not a difficult game, and some of that is just the automna rules. So really, you're only looking at 4 bits of sheet here, well, 3 actually, because one of them is the solo mode, to put this in the game. And honestly, I'm very tempted to include this every single time. This is a solid little mini expansion.
Get your ass to Mars.
Time length can be a little bit of an issue for this game, mainly when you've got 4 players. I think 4 players is maybe just a tad too long at times. You know, if you've got a slow player in your group, don't play this with them. 4 players can easily take you to the 2-hour mark, and even though I didn't feel like necessarily the game was taking 2 hours, it's still quite a lengthy amount of time for a worker placement of what is not the heaviest game in the world. But 3 rounds is a little misleading to players when people say, oh, it's only 3 rounds. Yeah, but it's a big like curve with those 3 rounds. The first round will not take you that long to do. The second will take exponentially longer, and the third will take exponentially longer than that. You know, you could say that a good, say, like a quarter of the game is taken up by the first round, and then the rest is taken up by the other 2 rounds. That's how big the curve is. It really does ramp up in terms of its game arc and like stuff you've got to do. But in that respect, 4 players can sometimes drag on a bit, you know, can sometimes go a little bit too long. Bear in mind, you've got to set it up and, you know, teach it as well. So you could be looking at a fairly lengthy affair for a 4-player game. But with 2 and 3 and the solo, the length is pretty good. I think 3 players is actually a sweet spot for the game. It's just the perfect blend of, you know, enough workers around to do stuff with, enough, enough stuff being blocked, but also a good amount of time spent. So, you know, I would certainly play this with 3 rather than 2, but 2 works just fine as well. And it's not like 4 players is out of bounds. I just have to know that I'm settling in for a slightly longer run. The game itself, in terms of its strategic depth, is also not as broad as you might think. I've mentioned that you can go asteroid mining and you can build some of these buildings, and these can lend to some cool combos, and you can complete some little objective cards throughout the way. But if you haven't included Mars contracts in there, there's only so much depth in the game. It's not that this is a light game, but it's certainly a step above Lords of Waterdeep, say. But this isn't really for like the die-hard heavy Euro gamers. You know, this is definitely a mid-weight game, and it sits very nicely in that kind of center bracket, which for me is a good thing, but for some of you it may be a little bit too light for what you want. And there are a couple of little aspects where, you know, I wish they maybe just trim those out. Like the favor tokens definitely, I think, need trimming out. You know, the idea that you get this cool ability for the rest of the round is great, but it's very expensive to get one of those. You have to get it early in order for it to actually pay any dividends, frankly. And even then, the rules on them are fiddly because you have to go into the book to find out what they do, so everybody keeps forgetting what they do. That is a little bit of an annoyance. As I mentioned already, the game is a table hog. You are going to need a lot of space for this game because you're going to need to set up these jigsaw pieces. You need to set up this. Everybody has got their own board with a couple of like little other boards on the side. You're obviously going to build more buildings. There's the, you know, the ships that go above the board. The Mars contracts will take up more room. This is quite a big table hog. For a game that's a mid-weight level worker placement, maybe just a bit too much of a table hog at times. You're definitely going to need a large table. You do not want to play this on some tiny rectangular table, but to be fair, you're getting a very big, imposing product with a lot of good, easy to read graphic design, so there is a good side to that. But yeah, be mindful that you're gonna need a sizable surface. Ceres overall has impressed me enough to be a solid game, but it's not necessarily reinventing the wheel here. Everything that is in this game we've seen before. We have seen this type of worker placement, we've seen the communal workers, we've seen the idea of building some more buildings and using those as other actions. So you're not buying this to be like a new innovative thing, and so some people might be like, well, where does this sit in place of some other worker placement game I've got? Because bear in mind, they are a dime a dozen. But what this does do very, very well is give you a smooth, buttery smooth even, streamlined experience. This is definitely bang smack on midweight. Like, you could not get more true neutral than this.
Put the dice away before I take them away.
Because it's not as light as something like Lords of Waterdeep, but I would say that there is less going on here than something like maybe the more complex Garfield games, or certainly more the Uri Rosenberg stuff. You know, this is probably on the same kind of wavelength as something like maybe like Architects of the West Kingdom, because Architects of the West Kingdom doesn't have a lot of rules in it, nor does this one, and they're both kind of in that area. But the fact that it is so smooth and pretty easy to teach, it's pretty easy to play, does enlighten this experience. Now, strategic depth is maybe not quite as high as it could be. I mean, yes, you can create some cool combos with these cards. This doesn't really change that much. It's more just a case of it moves around and dictates where you can go, so there's not a huge amount of depth there. But you do get some asymmetric building setups if you want to use those, and of course you can grab the mini expansions on the side, although I can only give this game so much of a rating for having to get a mini expansion to broaden the depth, though I will recommend getting Mars Contracts and shoving that in. You can skip Comets, but Mars Contracts I do recommend. And you can play it solo, and you can play it at most player counts. 4 players is just going to take you a bit longer. So there's a lot of good stuff going for it. It's just not really reinventing the wheel, or perhaps giving me like, oh, this is brand new, this is blowing my mind. This is just giving me another worker placement game that does what it sets out to do, but does it really well. So it's kind of hard to dictate where it falls. I play this game and I'm like, I'm good for a while, but I'm glad that I brought it out and I want to play it more. It's just not one that I would say, right, after I've played it, I am now gunning to play it again. Like if I took it to a convention, I would play it once at the convention and then I'd probably be good until the next time I'm playing it. I wouldn't necessarily bring it out multiple times at said convention. So I would definitely give this a solid rating. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10 overall. It's not quite distinction level, but maybe it could go to distinction level in the future. We don't know. This one could maybe be a bit of a sleeper hit, where it takes a little bit of time to build up. I mean, I've played this a fair few times already, but maybe it just needs a little bit longer to settle. But for now, really enjoying it. It's just nothing overly new, but it's definitely basically a case of what do you want? Do you want a mid-weight Euro? Do you want a mid-weight worker placement? Do you want it to be nice and smooth? Then great. I do wish that the favor tokens were done a bit better, and you can't exactly ignore them. They are kind of jarring in there. That is a problem. Time length with 4 can be a bit long, and certainly you're going to need a massive surface to deal with it. But so far, really enjoying my time with this, and I do recommend it as another solid hit from Artipia. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek. Check the link in the description, follow it, and please thumb it up. It gets it in the hot review section. It makes it stand out, and I appreciate it because it does the world for me in terms of getting this channel noticed. Don't forget to check out all the other reviews I've been doing. So many Essen games, it's unreal, and I've got more besides Age of Innovation, Virtual Revolution, possibly September if I can get time for it, possibly White Castle and Free Ring Circus. Oh, you name it, I've got so many games to look at. It's unreal. Oh, and Evacuation. Did I forget about that one as well? Yes, there is a ton of games to get reviewed and played properly. Hopefully I'll be done by Christmas, but it's a fun slog, but it's a slog. So take care, and remember, regardless of which little asteroid mining planet you'd like to settle on in the future, it's still only a game. So take care, and bye for now.